Good morning, everybody. We are live back here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel for another live stream podcast. Thanks to everybody tuning in live. Thanks to everybody watching on X, listening on Apple or Spotify. Hopefully your weekend was fantastic because we're into Monday, May 5th. It's the dead of spring, but it's starting to heat up in terms of NFL preview content as we have the schedule release next Wednesday, May 14th. 9 more days to go, so there's a lot to talk about. And in this video, as well as Wednesday and Friday, I'll be talking about projecting strength of schedule, looking at different schedules for different teams, trying to give you everything that you need to be prepared for next Wednesday. So whether you're looking at betting on futures, whether you're looking at getting ahead or you're just trying to get ready for preview season starting the week after, we'll hopefully have you caught up with everything you need to know before it all happens next Wednesday on May 14th with the schedule release. So in this video, I'm just going to be talking about a bit of the method that I use, which I think is different from what is presented online. I'll talk about the pros, I'll talk about the cons, and I'll kind of explain where I'm at with this to also reveal the top 5 easiest and hardest schedules of teams projected using this method. Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network is becoming the hype man of the channel, giving Ryan Roberts a little bit of run for his money. Saying looking forward to another great week of information from Adam. Well, I'm appreciating you coming by for another video. Good to have you back in. For anybody watching on YouTube currently, there's quite a few of you. I encourage audience participation throughout these shows, especially this one, because there is going to be a little bit of subjectivity with this. So as I go through what I'm talking about, let me know, are some of these decisions right? Are some of these decisions wrong? What might you do different? On the right-hand side of the window, there's a live chat box. You can jump in the chat, leave any questions, any comments, anything that you have that you're thinking about as the video is going on. Drop it in the box on the side. We'll be happy to get to them as we go through the show. But Crunch Time, appreciate you coming back for another show, along with everybody else who is currently watching live here on the channel. So, schedule release 2025. I would say every single year there's probably 3 to 4 different win totals or futures that are very actionable when the schedule is released. And we'll identify those as we go throughout the week. But the purpose of all of this, and I think from a handicapping perspective, the most important thing around schedule or release day is determining the strength of schedule. And that's useful for win totals. That's useful for handicapping. That's useful for projecting how teams will flow through the season. A lot of different things can come from that. Now, we know the teams that all of the teams are going to play as opponents home and away. And so we can do a lot of work with that to get ahead and get ready for what is coming up next week. The distribution of how the games are ordered, weeks 1 to 18, is really what you want to get ready to act on next Wednesday as things become available and things get leaked. So typically what happens and what I see is strength of schedule is evaluated 2 different ways. The first is the most common and what you're going to see a ton of, and let's call it the next 10 days of NFL content. And that is simply where strength of schedule is determined by wins and losses last year, the winning percentage. And so what you'll get is a lot of rankings 1 to 32 that look at how teams are facing opponents and how they ranked last year, and you'll get either an average or you'll get a cumulative, different ways that they'll be added up. The pros of this method is it's very easy to calculate, it's very easy to understand, and it does an okay job in reflecting how difficult the teams on the schedule for this upcoming year are going to be. The negative and the biggest con with that is obviously teams change from last year to this year. And so the win percentage of last year is not a really good indicator for all teams, especially those who have changes. Maybe a team, say like Jacksonville, last year was impacted by a lot of injuries to Trevor Lawrence and key guys. So that win rate may not really be reflective of what the Jags are coming into this season. So there's some negatives in a big way with that. Now, version 2 that you're going to see online is taking win totals from different sports books and then using that as either an average or a cumulative ranking to determine the strength of schedule for all of the teams based on the opponents they face. So You might have a team who faces opponents with an average win total of perhaps 9 wins, and that'll be ranked in order. And you'll get a lot of commentary from that. This team faces 6 different teams with double-digit win totals. This team faces only 1. A lot of different things can come from that. The pros of this method compared to the win percentage method that I just mentioned is you're getting something that is forward-looking, that has market input, that is relevant to this season and not based off of last season. These win totals are obviously set on the games to come. And so not only has there been work done by traders and odds makers who are making those numbers, but there's also now been some money that has been bet into this market with opinions expressed to shape these numbers a little bit further. And so I would say comfortably the win totals are going to get you a much better strength of schedule estimate than the win-loss records from last year, but that's how it's used. Now, the cons from the win totals are that the average win total in the NFL is off by just under 2 wins per season. There's a very big gap and a lot of variance in these win total numbers. And so while it's a really good number, proxy and metric to use right now, you get to the end of the year where projections for schedule and strength of schedule can be very difficult to have realized because so much changes over the year. And when you look back at some of the win total strength of schedule projections, some of these can be way off. So what I do, and I don't know, again, if it's better or worse, and I'll pull up the spreadsheet, is I take market ratings from the end of season last year and update them based on roster changes this year. And so let me explain as I'll go through this. I'll pull up the spreadsheet. And again, if you're watching live and you have questions, drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. So on the left-hand side, I'll move myself out of the picture momentarily, make it a little bit easier to see. So on this left-hand side is the current updated market ratings that I have. Now, you might be asking, what are market ratings and how do you find them and where do they come from? Simply put, these are ratings based off of point spreads and outcomes of games relative to team totals that were projected in the market. So simply put, these are power ratings that have no opinion put into them other than the opinions that go into the betting market. And this is how teams rank relative to an average team in the NFL. But you have to remember that these numbers have been updated to the best of my ability from last year into this year. So what we see typically to start a season is the gap between number 1 and number 32 typically is about 14 points. Over the course of the season, that tends to get a lot wider. For instance, last year it got to about 17 points, but for the most part, start of the season has a gap of about 14 points from best to worst in the NFL. And right now that's priced in slightly closer at 13 currently, but that's typically what you see from team 1 to team 32 going into week 1. And so when I talk about updating these market ratings and adjusting for them from last year into this year, a good example of this could be a team like the New England Patriots. Last year in market ratings at the end of the season, New England was rated 7.8 points worse than an average football team. I have them currently as 2 points worse than an average football team. So it is a team that I have upgraded 5 points for all of the offseason changes, coaching changes, offensive changes, defensive changes, draft, free agency, player talent increase. That's the adjustment that I have made for New England. Now, some of that adjustment is just due to what I would call new season re-ranking, because at the end of seasons, you typically find a much bigger spread, as I mentioned, in some of these teams than what their rating actually is, whether it's injuries, changes in motivation, changes in how teams are playing at the end of the season. That's how I've looked at it. And so it's about 1.5 points of extra that you tend to find priced in with some of these teams at the end of the year. And again, you just see that kind of condensed from the end of the year to the start of the season when things are priced a little bit closely and all teams are starting at 0-0 for their record. So I've gone through with all of these teams And again, it's not an opinion where I'm saying I like this team better, I like this team worse. This is just me trying to evaluate how much of these teams improved through free agency and through the draft, as well as coaching changes as well. And I've produced these updated market ratings. Now, the reason that these ratings are important is because I've gone through and I've made point spreads for all 272 regular season games. And all these point spreads do is take the market rating of the team in question. So, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles takes the market rating of the Dallas Cowboys. So the Eagles currently in these market ratings, Dallas is a 0, Philadelphia is a 6. So that would have the Philadelphia Eagles at home over the Cowboys rated 6 points better. I've added in 1.5 for every team for home field. That has produced a point spread of 7.5 for the Eagles at home to the Cowboys. And by turning this 7.5 for the point spread into a VIG-free implied probability on the money line, the Eagles' win probability in this game is 0.78 or 78%. So I've made point spreads for every Eagles game in this scenario. You have their rating compared to all of the opponent ratings with home field advantage added in. You have the power rating with home field advantage to make the point spread. Then you have the win probability for every single game. And I've taken the sum of that, which is 11.2, and that gives the Eagles 11.2 projected wins this season. I then divided that into home wins, which is 5.88. I divided that into away wins, which is 5.33. And that is how the Eagles season projects based on the point spreads for every single game with the sum of those implied probabilities, which are market ratings updated for every team. So all of this table on the right-hand side in your video screen is the results of the games which have been produced for all teams all season, all 272, to produce a win total. How much of that is home and away? And then what gets interesting, and the point of this video is it produces a strength of schedule both overall for the home games and for the away games. And the strength of schedule is determined by the average point spread rating for every single team. So, for example, in the case of the Philadelphia Eagles, the average opponent that they face from these ratings is 1.35 points better than an average team in the league. There are obviously pros and cons with doing this, as there is every single method. The pros of doing this is I think that it captures the overall strength of schedule relative to an average team better than these other metrics do. But what I also think that this does well, and it's something we'll talk about in the coming days, is it allows to project for changes in the schedule a little bit better than what you get from win totals, as well as what you get from just win-loss records looking back. Because it's pretty easy to go back and look and say, here is the maximum overperformance and maximum underperformance in a point spread value from the start of the season to the end of the season for teams that don't suffer injuries to their quarterbacks. You get a pretty tight band for how those teams can over and underperform. And as you look through a schedule, what I like to do as I'm looking through a team is point out, for example, with the Philadelphia Eagles, as I'm trying to evaluate, is this schedule going to play closer to what it's projected or further away? I can kind of do that evaluation very quickly with all of these teams going down the schedule. The floor and ceiling, for example, for the Kansas City Chiefs, if Patrick Mahomes is not injured, is quite narrow. Like you know that you're going to get a team that falls within a couple wins of their total 11, 12. You're probably not going to get a big overperform. It would be very unusual if you get a big underperform. You can be very confident in where that Chiefs rating is going to be. And you can also be confident looking back in past seasons saying that the Chiefs have not been above an 8. They haven't been below a 5 for more than a couple weeks, dating back to late a couple seasons ago when Mahomes was injured. It's just they play to that same rating very often during the course of a season. So you can get to a very high level of confidence with how these teams are going to play and how true this schedule is going to be. But it also allows, if you're projecting a team maybe like the Chargers to overperform, if this Chargers game and the Eagles schedule comes later in the year, I find that this is an easier way to say maybe the Chargers end up playing to 2 points better than an average team. If you're getting that Chargers rating late in the year, that's something that you can update pretty easily, and you can see right away how it changes the Eagles' schedule, what it turns their number into. Dropped it just lower than a tenth of a win from 11.21 to 11.1. I just find it a lot easier to navigate through this and say, like, if you're getting a lot of these teams really overperforming, and you get the Chargers 2 points better than expected, the Packers 2 points better than expected, the Vikings 2 points better than expected, it's really easy to get to a projected win total for the Eagles when you end up changing those. And you can see just how much it requires some of these teams to overperform to get to a point where you might be comfortable betting this Eagles win total. Because, I mean, right now I'm looking 11.1 with that Chargers upgrade. They're priced at 11.5. If you're trying to justify an Eagles over, maybe you're thinking they're winning 12 or 13 games, you have to see a lot of these teams really underperforming, or you have to get a big overperform from the Eagles in order to get to a point where the schedule and teams that they face project a win total that is in the 12 or 13 range. It requires a lot of over and underperformance from some of these teams that really puts into perspective, like, hey, this is really taking a big stance against what's projected to happen that might be bigger than you anticipate, might be bigger than you think. And that's how I tend to look at it too. So there's obviously a lot that goes into projecting some of these schedules, some of these strengths of schedules. But for me, this is how I find the best way to do this. It's the best way for me to think about it. And I think you get to better numbers than you do with win totals or win-loss projections that you are going to hear about. So with that said, after kind of getting through the method and explaining what's going on, I think it's a good time now to look at and start thinking about kind of the top 5 most difficult, the top 5 easiest, and kind of have some thoughts and takeaways from that. So as I take a sip of coffee, let's start with looking at the top 5 most difficult. And we'll walk through some of the schedules and look at why it's so difficult, what makes it so hard, and go from there. So first of all, the most difficult strength of schedule that is projected right now using this method is the New York Giants. And this is kind of interesting. I need to update some of these win totals on the right, but their average opponent this season, as it stands right now, projects to be 1.82 points better than an average football team. No team has it more difficult overall than the New York Giants. Here's what makes this even more difficult. Their home opponent average that they will face is better than a field goal on average than a average football team in the NFL. So the average opponent point spread rating for the New York Giants is plus 3.06. So let's scroll down to the Giants and look at what they face specifically. Now, a general rule of thumb is that teams have a higher ceiling in terms of exceeding their win total when they have an easier home schedule, because that is where their point spread gets increased a little bit further with the home field advantage. So you get more of these tallies from the win probability sums increasing when you're looking at bigger spreads on their home games, because that's going to contribute more to it. So when I'm looking at teams that can really overperform, if they have a higher rating and they're facing teams at home that are easier to. I'm trying to explain this without jumbling everything. Basically, if you're looking for a team that can overperform, you want them to have a more difficult home schedule and an easier road schedule, so then they can have their tougher games at home. And that's when you see you're not going to get those big negative games where you're looking at like these 0.19 and 0.25s that kind of kill your week, when you can have those a little bit closer to 50-50 games, or in a case like Buffalo, which we'll talk about, when you're stacking those hard games at home, that's when you tend to find teams having a little bit more window to overperform. Now, the problem with the Giants is they're not a very good football team, and you look at some of these ratings and some of these home game point spreads that are projected. I think it's tough to see a spot on the Giants' schedule where they are going to be a home favorite. Remember, you're looking at this reversed because it's relative to an average team. The easiest opponent right now on the Giants' home schedule is the Dallas Cowboys. I don't see a world where the Giants are going to be favored over the Cowboys barring injury. And so you have Eagles, Commanders, Packers, Vikings, Chiefs, Chargers, 49ers at home. The Giants are going to be a field goal-ish plus dog at home in every single game. When you look at how this breaks down for their home difficulty, again, field goal better than an average team. And so if you're trying to justify some of the Giants' hype and think about the Giants' improvements in the free agency window and the draft, and you're saying, like, I like all of the moves that the Giants made, like, how much higher can you rate the Giants based on how they finished last year to where they are now to get to a point where you're comfortable betting the over? So last year, the New York Giants finished the season 8.8 points worse than an average football team. So I've already upgraded them about 2.5 points because, again, you have a bit of adjustment just for the season restarting, but they're at 4.5. So with a win total of 5.5 for the Giants, like, how much further do you need to upgrade this team based on the schedule to get to a point where you're looking at 6 wins? Let's say you make them 2 points better, a 4-point upgrade. Now you're getting into the 6-win window. So if you're looking at the Giants 2 points worse than an average football team, you're putting them in the same category as teams like the Colts, the Patriots, the Falcons, the Jaguars. Like, are you getting to a point where you're comfortable putting the Giants in that window of teams? I think the answer is probably no, but that's where you need to get to with the Giants if you're looking at kind of comfortably playing into an over. Now, the road schedule doesn't get much easier. This is probably going to play slightly easier than projected. A lot of questions with the Raiders. Patriots are a team that's been upgraded a ton. The Saints game is certainly going to play easier. That's a team that I'm probably having a little bit too high currently in the ratings. So there's definitely some easier games on the road for the Giants, but these home games for New York all season are just absolutely brutal. The other teams that we're looking at for difficult, the 3 teams in the NFC North: Lions, Bears, and Vikings. And this is something that's common throughout. The differences that I'm seeing initially in this is for the Minnesota Vikings. They have a bit of a different schedule break than what the Lions and the Bears do. If you look at the Bears cell right here, their average home opponent is 0.5 point worse than an average team. The average home opponent for the Lions is 0.6 points worse than an average team. But the Vikings have the most difficult home schedule of opponents with these point spreads at 3.19 points better than an average football team. So unlike the Bears and unlike the Packers, the Vikings have the vast majority of their difficult games on the schedule being played at home. And when you think about how big their home field advantage is, 1.5 as a default is shortchanging them a little bit, certainly. But when you have all these home games stacked, this can cause a lot of variance in what you're looking at for the projection. Because as you can look in the Viking schedule here, away from home, they have the 3 difficult games in the NFC North against those opponents. Outside of it, Cowboys rated as an average team. That's maybe slightly generous. You have the Giants, as we just talked about, far worse than an average team. The Browns, who's going to be starting a quarterback, far worse than an average team. The Steelers, who's going to be starting a quarterback, far worse than an average team. Seattle, a point worse currently. A lot of questions about how that offense is going to shape up. And then you have the Chargers, who are probably rated right now at a little bit of a generous mark at 2 points better than an average team. What makes this interesting for the Vikings projection is you look at some of these home games where it's going to be very difficult. Outside of Atlanta, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Washington, Philly, and then the 3 games in the division. Question for me becomes, if this Vikings team with J.J. McCarthy taking over and the new offensive line can play perhaps better than this 2-point rating would suggest, all of a sudden with this home field advantage getting increased, where they've had such a big home field advantage, especially when it comes to pricing and the point spread, do all of a sudden we start to see them favored in a few more of these games, and it flips this? A team like the Vikings, if they're able to play well at home and you see these values tick up, all of a sudden this win total and this win projection is going to be a lot closer to 10 than it is in the 8s. And in terms of just putting Minnesota into perspective, they finished last year 4.9 points better than an average football team. And Minnesota's a team I currently have rated at 2. So they've actually been lowered in their rating relative to how they finished last year. So not only is there some ceiling that's maybe not realized for Minnesota because of the uncertainty at quarterback, but these home games become very interesting. If you think that rating goes up, you get an increase in home field advantage. Perhaps it's playing closer to 2.5 than 1.5. All of a sudden, this 8.78 projection starts to look a lot higher, a lot quicker. So something to keep in mind with Minnesota. Now, the opposite is true for Chicago and Detroit. Let's talk about Detroit for a second. Every time Detroit plays away from home this season, it is going to be an absolute battle. Rams, Chiefs, Commanders, Eagles, Bengals, Ravens, Vikings, Packers, Bears. The easiest opponent on this schedule is going to be the Chicago Bears. And we know in the NFC North with those games always playing very competitive. But think about how some of these teams in these ratings might adjust over the season. Are the Rams going to be significantly worse than a top 7 to 8 rated team, as you're looking at them currently at 4 points better than an average team? I think the answer is no. Kansas City, as we talked about, they're going to be a top 5 team as a floor, potential to be the highest rated team in the league. Washington at 3.5 is a team that I have upgraded from an end of year rating last year of 1.5. So this is a number that comes with some variance, but certainly year 2 for Jaden Daniels could absolutely play true to number. Eagles going to play true to that 6. The Bengals at 2.5. They finished last year at 2.5. Remember how well they were playing at the end of last year. I think that's a very fair rating for the Bengals. I think 6.5 is very fair for the Ravens. And as we talked about, this Vikings number, that might be a little bit low. And then for the Packers, I think 4 plays very close to how they end up being rated. There's not a lot of wiggle room for this Lions schedule, barring injury, as always with any of this, to play a lot easier. There just isn't. So the Lions are going to have to win to have a chance of getting into that 11-win range. You can't have a bad game at home all season because every single road game is going to be brutal. So this home field advantage for the Lions is massive and is going to need to be, if they have a chance, if you're looking at an over, for them getting over their win total. Something else to watch for with the Lions, obviously new coordinators on both sides of the ball. When I talk about sensitivity of the schedule draw next week, if the Lions are starting with a chunk of these games in September while they're trying to get new coordinators worked out, I think there's a lot of impact on the draw of this schedule, given all the changes that the Lions have going on. if you're getting some of these games early on in September and you're not getting a lot of these home games, that's going to make that schedule draw quite important relative to the win total for the Lions. Now, all of that is times 10 for the Bears. So again, 3 games in the division for Chicago away from home is brutal. Eagles, Commanders, Ravens, Bengals, 49ers, Raiders. Very similar schedule. The one difference for Chicago is this Raiders game. The only out and the only game where I could see the Bears being favored on the road this entire season is going to be at the Las Vegas Raiders. That's the only game that I can see. Again, there's a caveat to all of this, barring injury. But this is going to be so tough for the Bears away from home outside of this Raiders game. And here's what's interesting with Chicago. Their projection right now, 7.47 wins. They are rated currently as an average team in the league. They finished last year rated 2 points worse in market than an average football team. So even with a 2-point upgrade, you're still looking at 7.5 wins. And so the question becomes with how difficult the schedule is for Chicago. Let's say you make them 2 points better than an average football team, which means they're at the same level as the Chargers, same level as the Vikings, same level as the Bengals. Maybe that's something that you agree with. And you're saying that's where I'm going to put them. They're still only at 8.9 wins, which with a win total of 8.5 shaded to the over, I have a hard time viewing probably a quarter of a win as enough of an edge to get comfortable betting the over. So if you're looking at the Bears now, which a lot of people are, and saying this is a team I want to bet over, you're probably comfortably needing them 3 to 3.5 points better as a starting rating than an average football team in order to get to a point where you're saying there's a little less than a full win here of cushion over or what I'm looking at for current prices in the market. That's a crazy high rating for Chicago. That would have them in the same territory as the Rams, Packers, Lions, not far off from the Chiefs, equal with the Commanders. I don't know how anyone can be that comfortable with that Bears rating at the moment. Maybe I'm a shade low having them an average team. But again, talking about sensitivity in the schedule draw, think about this. You have possibly 5 new guys on the offensive line, maybe 4 new faces, 1 guy playing out of position up front, a new offense, new scheme, new play calling, new coach, new coordinators. You have so many changes for the Bears. If these away games get drawn early, aside from the Raiders, I think Chicago is probably impacted by the schedule drawn next week more than any other team in it being a negative way. If you get these away games stacked early for Chicago and they have to go through all of those changes, I mean, my God, that's going to be a brutal intro for what we're looking for Chicago to start the year with all of those changes and all of those different pieces and all those different weapons. Like, that is going to be drastic. So I have Chicago circled as a team next Wednesday during the schedule draw as being very sensitive to how those games are distributed. Faduni says the public expects the Bears to do really well with the weapons, plus Ben Johnson signing. Also expect Caleb to be better. I could turn this into just a Bears preview podcast for the next 2 months and probably do pretty well. Obviously, the team is better. Obviously, the roster is better. I have no doubts about that. I have no doubts the scheme is going to be better. And for Caleb Williams as a rookie, you go through 3 different play callers and you're trying to figure everything out. Like, it's going to be a mess. Now, the weapons, new tight end, new wide receiver, all of that is a major positive. The new interior offensive line, a big positive. Potentially having tackles in new places. I have almost no negatives for the Bears in terms of what they've done this offseason. But here's kind of my gripe with this is There's a lot of data, which will be good for a next video, that says when you have a lot of offensive line changes, that takes time. Caleb Williams, his college tendency was to hold on to the football for a very long time. We saw it last year. He was sacked the most in the league. Changing out of that tendency is going to take time. Ben Johnson, for as great as it might be, going from offensive coordinator to a head coach, that takes time too. It might be quicker than usual, but there's so many things that I look at with the Bears that are going to take time. I think they can all work out and be great. If you're trying to get acclimated and these things that are taking time end up coming against the Lions in Detroit, the Packers at Lambeau, the Eagles in Philly, Washington, Baltimore, Cincinnati on the road to start, that's pretty brutal. If it's at home against the Saints or the Steelers or the Browns or the Giants, okay, you have some room there to figure things out and you have some allowance for mistakes and issues. That's why I think this Bears schedule draw is incredibly important to the win total. Because if you're this young core of players with a new coach and you're in this division where maybe you start 1-3 or 1-4 because you have this difficulty, you still might have a lot of easy games later in the year, but now all of a sudden you're playing from behind, chasing for 3 months, trying to catch up to the Vikings, Packers, and Lions ahead of you. That puts a lot of strain and really reduces a lot of room for error. I think the schedule draw is incredibly important for the Bears next week. Scott says the Bears' home schedule outside division opponents is very soft. You're 100% correct. And that's going to have a big impact. When you look at this outside of the division, certainly is very easy. I think the Bears are going to be favored in every single one of those games, and they have to stack those wins. You hope, as a Bears fan, those games, as I was saying, come early in the schedule draw next week. Faduni with a hot take. Joe Burrow was the MVP last season in my eyes. I like it. David Jackson says, thanks for all the awesome breakdowns and info. Glad you're feeling better. Epic bounce back. I don't know if it was epic. It took 10 days. We're at about 95% now. So it was a rough one, that's for sure. But we're through it, and we're heading to the schedule release. HTTV says, I think the Lions need those road games early because Goff is awful in outdoor cold games, and a lot of those road games are in outdoor stadiums that get very cold. Interesting thought. That's a level that I haven't got to yet, but that's a good thought because you're certainly right with his performance in and out. So Bears, Packers, obviously cold outdoor, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Philly, Washington, KC. You're right. You're not getting a lot of breaks with those outdoor games outside of the Rams, which doesn't matter when it comes from, but you're hoping that would obviously be later to avoid it. Great comment there from HTTV on how those away games are going to break down. And that's a really strong point. Great comment. That's why I encourage them. You guys have thoughts and see things that I haven't seen yet. That's a very good one there for sure. That wins comment of the day so far, aside from the hype posts that we've seen for pumping up the show. So great thought there. And now that's going to break down. Last team I want to talk about, Philadelphia Eagles, the champs. 5th most difficult schedule that is projected. Average opponent, 1.4 points better than an average team. Home opponents skew easier than the road games, 0.75 points better. Away teams, 2 points better. Win total is 11. We've already talked about them a little bit just by chance, going through that Chargers example. So easier home games, Raiders, Broncos will be competitive, but certainly a big rating advantage there. Big rating advantage against the Bears. In division against the Commanders, in division against the Cowboys, in division against the Giants. So NFC East games at home for the Eagles skewing easier. The Rams is going to be a difficult one. The Lions is going to be difficult too. But again, some timing sensitivity in that, as mentioned by HTTV, in how that breaks down. Away games for Philly outside of the division, Chiefs, Bills, Chargers, Packers, Vikings, Buccaneers. This is what if anything gives the Eagles some trouble this year, is going to be this chunk of games right here. This is really tough. And I look at a team like Tampa Bay with offensive weapons added. They could play better than this average rating of 0 right now has them. The Vikings, with that strong home field advantage, could certainly play better than this rating is projected at 2. The Packers at 4, priced pretty generously, but I could see the Packers being a team that plays to a 4.5, 5 rating over the season. They have, again, added weapons on offense. The Chargers at 2, that's a team I could see playing to probably a ceiling of 3, 3.5. The Bills, they're the best team in football right now. And the Chiefs at 5, arguably slightly underpriced. Could probably see them easily getting into that 6.5, 7 rating range as the season goes on. So, again, when I talk about doing this method, this is why. Because if you're trying to look at, say, a Chiefs win total of 11.5, it's really hard to say, like, I'm going to put the Chiefs at 12.5, right? Or I'm going to put them at 11.75. It's hard to kind of take into account like what that means exactly when you think about it. But if you're saying, hey, I'm going to put the Chiefs over the course of I think the Chiefs can get to 7, which is a number, by the way, last year the Chiefs were one of their lowest rated marks all season dealing with injuries. But the Chiefs getting to a 7 is not difficult from a ratings perspective. The Bills finished last year at a 7. So let's say the Bills get to a 7. We're going to say the Chargers get to 3.5. Who else do we have on this Eagles schedule? The Buccaneers and the Vikings. Let's say the Vikings get to a 3. And let's say this Buccaneers offense takes off and they get to 1.5. I can go back and look and see specifically like how many times or how many weeks were the Chiefs at a 7, how many weeks were the Bills at a 7. I can tell you right now, these numbers are not far off. And the reason I like going point spreads with this is because I can say like this is realistic for these teams to get to. Look what this did to the Eagles win total with this. It dropped it to 10.9. And I don't think that what I just did in adjusting these numbers for these teams, putting the Chiefs and Bills at 7, putting the Chargers to 3.5, the Vikings to 3, the Buccaneers to 1.5, I don't think that's unrealistic at all. I think that is very well in the realm of possibilities for what we might see these teams end up as when these games are played. And so if this becomes reality and this chunk of away games plays more difficult than expected, for the Eagles to get over their win total, which is 11.5, like how high do they need to go? Do they need to be an 8? Putting them at an 8 gets them to 11.9. So like you're just barely getting over that 11.5 by getting the Eagles to an 8. And a lot of that comes from balancing out some of these teams improving and then just having big home field advantages. But last year, for instance, if you're trying to just compare, the Philadelphia Eagles in their championship season were at a 6.2 at the end of the year. So are you going to get almost 2 points better than that in market? Probably not for the Eagles. And so it kind of goes to show the reason I like going to this method is it's just a lot easier to kind of project out and visualize what these teams might be. And there's a lot more data to look back on to say, like, this is what these teams were. There's precedence for this, which is why I like it so much. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at the strength of schedule and the Eagles and how this is going to look and how this is going to be playing out over the course of the season. And for the Eagles, it's certainly very difficult because of that chunk of games at the bottom of the schedule. Lucid13311 says, thank you. Thank you for joining in. Scott says, Eagles, Lions, the openers for the NFL. Interesting for sure. Faduni says, problem here is that the Chiefs can still make the playoffs and not surpass their win total. Fair game. Absolutely. I think that's true for a lot of these teams for sure. And Scott says, I could very easily see the Commanders winning the NFC East this coming season. It would be a big leap relative to what they did last year, but it's certainly in play to an extent as well. Before we end up sending everybody home today, I want to remind everybody that the RAS Picks NFL service is now live. You can get all the details at raspicks.com/NFL. The service is live for 2025. First release as early as May 15th. Early bird pricing is available on site for anybody who wants to join in. Look at it as an option. Win totals will begin being sent out after the schedule release on May 14th, coming up next Wednesday. So for anybody who wants more details for the service, www.raspicks.com/NFL. Wednesday, we'll look at some of the teams that have it very easy, some of the teams that have it as schedules that could play a lot easier than projected, that might be ones you want to look at relative to their win totals, perhaps being a little bit too low. We'll talk about all of those on the other side of the spectrum. Won't have to go through the full methodology again, but we will look at those teams coming up this Wednesday, at the schedule release next Wednesday, next show here on the YouTube channel, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific time. If you're done here, I encourage everybody to go over to raspicks.com/NFL to check out the details for the service. Hope everybody has a fantastic Monday. We'll chat to you again Wednesday morning, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific.